Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Kristen Parent, and I am the Program and Events Manager for the Middleton Chamber. We really appreciate you guys taking time to be here with us. Just a few announcements. I want to make sure I thank our sponsors today, which are H. Kruger and Associates and Total Wine. These programs, although they're virtual still, are made possible by sponsorships from these great organizations. So we are going to ask you guys to leave yourselves on mute. So if this is one of your first Zoom calls, you can do that on the lower bottom bar that will pop up. And if you see a red slash through your microphone, you are on mute. Just also watch your camera. We won't want any mishaps to happen there. That can be turned on and off the same way that you turn your microphone. We have noticed some people that connect with the AirPods have some audio quality issues sometimes. So if you're having that problem, you might want to try dialing in by your phone. We are going to utilize the chat feature today. So as we asked you guys to stay on mute, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in there, and I'll be monitoring that for Spencer and can politely interrupt and ask those at the time, or we'll be opening things up at the end for question and answer there too. Let's see, I think that's kind of it. So now I'd like to introduce Spencer. So Spencer Smith is the founder of social media marketing company Amplify and is an instructor at the University of Wisconsin and Rutgers University. He is formerly a VP of sales for 2 Fortune 100 companies. He has been called a social media expert by Forbes, and Amplify is the winner of 4 consecutive In Business Magazine Executive Choice Awards for social media consulting company. Spencer has spoken to over 250 events since 2015, including a presentation at the New York Stock Exchange in 2017. And his book, which this presentation is kind of modeled after, was featured in Forbes and is an Amazon bestseller. So with that, Spencer, I'd love to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Kristen. And thank you, everybody. So just to show you what this platform looks like real quick that we're going to be using, like many of you, I had a lot of cancellations, and in one day I had 3 speeches. One was in Austin, one was in Denver, and one was in Orlando, where it seems like the conference organizers are all talking to each other and decided to cancel everything. What I heard is just a lot of despondence from them, right? This is something they had planned on doing all year and didn't have a backup plan. So we launched this platform. This is the little brother of the big sister flagship called Conference in a Cloud. This is called Training in a Cloud. And the goal of this is to give you something afterwards. So after we, I'll get excited about this stuff, how do we actually go back and revisit the material? So what I shared in the chat and what this link, this bit.ly link will take you to, this is going to be locked down afterward, but it's open to everybody right now if you want to follow along at home. It's bit.ly/ROTOMA, which is the name of the book, as well as the name of the concept that I'll get into in just a second, -Middleton. That'll take you to this page that you see right now. And again, thanks to our sponsors who I added to the page here. So what you're going to notice here, as far as how we follow along, and I'm going to go into the PowerPoint, but you can use this as you see fit, is that this is a narration, a video narration of the first chapter of the book to at least give you a little bit of context as to where it happened or where the original idea came from. The chapter 1 of the book in a PDF form, as well as if you want to buy the book on Amazon. And then I divvied up each of the respective lessons here. So the way that you would navigate this then after the fact is you would go in here, and this would be the first few slides, okay? And you can download the PowerPoint here, and it'll open in a Office document. So again, you can use this as you watch the video, or you can use this as we walk through as well. It's really up to you how you want to use this. But the ultimate goal is to give you one main repository from which to operate. So all you have to do is bookmark this one page, and this will be dynamically updated with the content. So as I mentioned to Kristen, if we have the video afterward, we can either take it in its entirety and upload it to this platform, or we can divvy it up into the respective lessons as well. So that's what the platform looks like. So without further ado, I will get into the presentation, and just bear with me a second here. Here we go. So here's our opening slide, and then here is the slide that you were just looking at. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to consider is take the idea that we adopted at our team. And if you look at our team as it stands right now, I'm the old guy on our team. So I'm the Gen X guy, I'm the 44-year-old. And then we have 2 that I think would identify as millennials, and then 1 that would be identified as a Gen Z. Now, a phenomenon that I've discovered in working with this team for a while is I've never heard them utter the phrase, "I don't know how to do that." Because Why would you not know how to do something? But for those of us who are older, right, oftentimes we have these predispositions when it comes to things like social media, digital marketing, et cetera, that either it's really not for us, it doesn't work in our industry, I'm too old, whatever the case might be. But I think it's really, especially now more than ever, incumbent upon us to adapt to what these things will look like. Now, this is the 74th webinar that I've given in the past 50 business days. And what I've gathered from a lot of the folks, and we're talking a couple thousand people, is they've at least walked away at the end and gone, well, if I'm not doing this, at least I know specifically what I'm not doing, which is really, really important, right? Because at least you know what you're missing out on if you choose not to do these things. And that would be my ask of you, is even if you don't implement any of these ideas, please just at least take heart that this is something that you will walk away and know maybe some things that you didn't think about before. So the origination for this idea is the book ROTOMA. And I'd written this with DP Knudten back about 3 years ago or so. And it's kind of a goofy title, but being in Madison, which makes this really easy, it's pronounced like Monona. So ROTOMA, like Monona. And what that stands for is Return on Top of Mind Awareness. Because if any of you are in digital marketing like me, and I know a few of you just looking at the participant list definitely are, you get that inevitable question from those with whom you're working or those to whom you're selling. And that's, what's our ROI, right? What's our return on investment of us taking action on these things that you're proposing here? And so that's what we'll talk about, is what is the ROI and why is that going to apply to you or not apply to you as you see fit? Now, these are the obligatory social follows. If you want to give me a social follow or connect in on LinkedIn or whatever verb we're using on LinkedIn, that'd be great. And just to add a little bit of validity to the concept, this was featured in Forbes, as Kristen had mentioned, back in November of 27. So that was a really nice jumping off point that ended up putting us on the bestseller list. So I feel like this is some really valuable information that hopefully will value or help value what it is that you think in this space as well. So, management guru known as Peter Drucker, who's no longer with us, but he purported to say what gets measured, what gets measured gets managed. And it's debatable whether he actually uttered that phrase or not, but oftentimes he's credited with it. And so if we think in terms of what can we measure and what do we then manage, I'm going to ask you to keep in mind that first part of that, what gets measured, and then if we can actually do that through the first portion of this presentation. So if we look at what measurements you can use to gauge social media success, I'm going to ask you in the chat to respond. How do we measure social media success? What kind of stuff do we look at typically? Let me know in the chat what you think. All right. We see likes, engagement, shares, followers likes, leads. Well, I always love the leads one. We have reach. So thank you, Steve and John and Aaron and Amanda and E. Jones, whoever that might be. Appreciate it. Clicks. All right. We have all of those things. Sales. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning sales as well. We have all of those things, right? And if you think about this being very typical, like a funnel, we have watch time from Chelsea. Thank you. Pablo says productive conversations. All really, really good points, guys. Thank you. So if we think about this being in a funnel context, right? Impressions would typically be the top. Engagements would be those who show some kind of interest in what it is that we're doing through likes, comments, that kind of stuff. Clicks is ultimately if we have a call to action, right? We're going to share this thing with hopes that people ultimately take some kind of action as opposed to just being relegated to the social media platform. So the like or the comment or share would exist on social media. Click would then usually take somebody off site, right? Go to your website as an example. A conversion would be if somebody actually fills out a form. A actual revenue generated portion of it would be, hey, are we selling stuff or not? And then et cetera. And the et cetera part is typically called this, right? ROI. We look at this as being, well, what's my return on investment? All of these things, of the aggregate of all of these things, what ends up happening as a result? And can we actually measure that? Now, fortunately, I went to college for finance, and we had a couple variations of either return on investment or return of investment. So the of investment is you put in, let's say, $1,000, and it takes you 10 months to get it back. That would be your return of investment. So you get your $1,000 back, and then you can start to do something. It's called the acceleration of money or velocity of money. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a very simple concept. An ROI typically looks like this. We say ROI is gains minus cost divided by cost. So if you look at the simple example, you say if we invest 4 and we get 10, that means that we have a 1.5x rate of return. In other words, for every dollar that you put in, you get $1.50 back. And so for those of you who play in the e-commerce space, and I know there are a few of those on the call right now, you know that there's something that we call ROAS, or return on ad spend, meaning we put in $1, what is the multiplier of that? Is it 50 cents? Is it 2x? Is it 15x, et cetera? So it's a really easy math problem, but is it? This is where it gets a little bit more difficult. Well, what is a gain and what is a cost? Well, let's see. Could gain just be revenue? Could gain just be new sales? Could it be existing sales? Like, what does it really look like? So I'm going to ask you in the chat, tell me, what are the gains in this context? What are the gains and what are the costs? How do we assess those things? What are the ways that we look at gains or costs? So Chelsea says cost could be time spent on something. Thank you for going right there. I appreciate that, Chelsea. Okay. John says costs are time and money spent. Gains are revenue or possibly brand awareness. Thank you for mentioning that. Steve says gains could be sales or lifetime value. Thank you for that, Steve. I appreciate it. Gains is branding, brand equity. Thank you for that. Pablo says gains could be orders, exposure, top of mind, revenue. Steve also says gains can be referrals to tie to customers gain. Now, what I love about this group, right, is that you guys are already going to a different level than where most people would go, because we oftentimes think about a transaction, right, a one-time dollar amount, that is a gain. And what does it cost us to get those things? And Pablo said time, just like Chelsea did. So time is a huge factor, right? So when we start to disambiguate what gains and costs are, we see that there's a lot of stuff to consider here. So gains could be sales, or in other words, just top line revenue. It could be new customers, because what's harder, new customers or selling to existing customers? Just as an aside, think about this. There's only really 3 ways to fundamentally grow your business. That's either you get new customers, one, which is the hardest one. You sell more often to the people who are already buying from you, and we call that frequency, or you sell more to existing customers, and we call that breadth, right? So with a D, breadth. So those are really only the 3 ways to grow your business. So when you look at new customers, that's oftentimes the most difficult, right? Because that first dollar is always the hardest thing from which people can operate, because they go, well, I'm mentally buying in. There's a psychological factor to this. So new customers are really tough. Market share, in other words, how much are we then permeating the market and having control of the market? Are we increasing our market share, which is obviously super important? Brand recognition, which is crossing that chasm between I've never heard of you in my life, and for some reason you ring a bell. And it's so much easier to sell to somebody, right? It's so much easier to generate revenue when somebody's actually heard of you, as opposed to having to start from zero. And then existing customer loyalty. And I think this cannot be overstated, especially now. And we call this affinity. And I think about this almost like people affirming that they made a good decision. And it's talking to a lot of these people on these webinars that we've talked about. It's been almost entirely in financial services. So these are a bunch of people who typically rely on the ability to see people in person with how they do business and they do prospecting. Now, what I think is really important for any of us who are practitioners is we need to showcase to people that we're getting better at what we do. So just to give you an example, we have an arm of our business that deals with physicians and compounding pharmacies. This is basically concierge medicine, right? This is not going to the hospital. This is you finding a physician, and you meet with that physician privately, and that physician talks to a compounding pharmacist who makes you specialty drugs. Now, the very best people that I know in this space are not the people who got on med school or pharmacy school and go, well, I guess I'm done learning now. I don't need to do this anymore. I can just go practice medicine. They go to those conferences every single year, virtual or in person, and they further their education. And what they oftentimes don't do is document that, right? Because everybody in that space, everybody at that conference knows that you're doing this. But I think oftentimes we do ourselves a disservice by not effectively documenting what we're getting better at. And for those of you on this call, who I know there's a lot in the digital and social space specifically, you're probably getting better on a daily basis. And that is not an exaggeration. You're probably getting better at something. So why not showcase to people that you are getting better at something? So again, as they see what it is that you do on social or through email or however you communicate with them, they go, I'm really glad I chose that person, because obviously they're not just sitting back, they're constantly getting better. So they don't have that fear of missing out. Okay, that's really, really important. So thanks for that, Chelsea. Oh yeah, that's awesome. All right, so let's look at the costs as well. Costs are oftentimes hard dollar, and that's lot of times where we stop, right? If I'm a CFO, I go, well, what kind of check am I writing? But then if we go a step further, we look at soft dollar costs, and soft dollar costs are something like time, right? Not something for which we write a check, but we're using individuals' time on our team, whether they be hourly, salary, commission, whatever it might be. Risk assumed, meaning how much is this money at risk? Is this entirely going to be lost? Like if I put $1 in here, is there a chance that I might get 0 back? Is there a chance that I might get 50% back? So there's weighing risk of that money, right? How will that come back if it does at all? And then of course, opportunity cost. And that's a huge one because we have to shift resources from one side to the other. We go, well, I'm going to spend money here, knowing I'm not going to spend money here, or spend time here, not spending time here. So again, this gets really, really nebulous as far as what this stuff actually means when it comes to ROI. So when I think about ROI, specifically through the lens of social media marketing and digital marketing, my goal for you is this, is to think in terms of this very simple logic. The goal in business is not to be the most talented person. And the reason why I say that is because you don't have to be absolutely the very best to be in business and to do really, really well. Because oftentimes, if you just spend all of your time getting better at your work, you don't actually do your real work. Okay. So the goal is not to be the most talented, not to be unequivocally the very best. The goal of business is not to be the most well known person either. You don't have to be the most famous version of who you are, what it is that you do. Okay. So you don't have to be the most talented. You don't have to be the most famous. You simply need to be the person who's top of mind for the right people at the right time. So if I were to ask you without thinking about it, who's the lawyer that comes to mind that you know? Who's the dry cleaner that comes to mind? Who's the cupcake purveyor? Who is the chiropractor? Like you will think of somebody, and for some reason that person or that company sticks out in your mind as that one go-to. And why is that? It's because of all of these myriad factors that we talked about. Okay, so that's really what's most impactful is when people think about, I need this, who do I go to first? And that also just, it transcends the idea of people doing business with you. It's how do they think about referring you to other people as well? Okay, so if you're on the Twitters, and I know a few of you are, if you want to tweet this out, I'd be honored. I'd love to have you tag me as well. So the goal is to be the person who's top of mind for the right people at the right time. Hashtag social media, hashtag ROI. All right, so let's get into section 2. So if you're following along on the lessons, this would be lesson number 2. Testing the hypothesis. Now, what I want you to do in the chat for me, this is going to be fun. We've never actually done this via chat, so this is really cool. Think about who is the first athlete, actor, or business person that comes to mind and type that individual in the chat for me. LeBron, Alex Morgan, Michael Jordan, a lot of Michael Jordans. Man, that Last Dance is really having a lot of effect on a lot of people, isn't it? Kobe, Alonzo Tucker, Kobe, a lot of sports. Barry Sanders, Ryan Reynolds, Bill Gates. All right, thanks, Jesse. Terry Healy says Brett Favre. Michael Jordan. Chelsea says she's obsessed with Jason Bateman, Bill Gates. Thank you, Kate. Val Kilmer, Steve. I think maybe Steve's probably thinking about the, was that a New York Times piece, Steve, that they just did on Val Kilmer? That was pretty interesting. Tom Hanks, Usain Bolt, Warren Buffett, Mark Cuban, Tom Selleck. Nice. All right, cool. Well, thank you guys for sharing those. Now, let's look at these 3 people. And what I noticed is not a single person said any one of these guys. Now, who are these people? Well, the leftmost person is Iron Mike Tyson. Now, just to give you some context, when I was growing up, Mike Tyson and Jordan, probably even Mike Tyson before Michael Jordan, was unequivocally the biggest athlete there was. So the world would stop when Michael Jordan would, I'm sorry, when Mike Tyson would fight, the world would stop and watch because he was about to destroy somebody in about 90 seconds. And this was on HBO back when a few people at HBO and we all gathered at people's houses and I was like 12 and just watched Mike Tyson destroy people. Middle person is, of course, Russell Crowe, who when I think he, like 2001, I'm pretty sure it was, he got the Oscar for Best Actor for Gladiator. And that actually won Best Picture, Best Director, all of this other stuff. But he was the it guy in Hollywood for quite a few years after that. And the rightmost guy is kind of an obscure one. It's getting more obscure by the day. And that is Lee Iacocca. And he had left Ford to go run Chrysler almost out of spite for Ford. And the way you can always remember to spell his last name is I am chairman of Chrysler always. Now, to give you some context, so I know Warren Buffett was mentioned by Steve. What Lee Iacocca used to do was fly into Japan and go give speeches there, and there'd be throngs of fans there waiting for him just to get off the plane to greet him. So he was that guy. Like, he was a big, big, big business person back before there were really that many big business people. But what I noticed is not a single person here mentioned any one of these three guys at all. So I would debate that all of these three were at the very, very top of their respective craft, and for some reason we don't think about them anymore. So why this is really important is because regardless of how famous you are, you need to maintain your activity, otherwise you're going to fall off. And there's never been a better example of this than right this second. Everybody who's famous, who's not performing right now, is jockeying for any kind of attention that they can. So everybody in Hollywood, every athlete you see, all they're trying to do is maintain relevance, right? Because they're like, I'm not on the soccer field. I'm not playing basketball. I'm not making movies. Like, I have to stay relevant. So how do we continuously show up? And that's where a lot of them turn to social media. And what I really love from an example standpoint is Will Smith, just a few years ago, kind of said, you know what? I haven't figured out this social media thing. I need to start from scratch on Instagram. And you could see he was kind of struggling at first because he really didn't know his place. And there were so many more people that were famous on Instagram, but he started to take over the platform a little bit better, a little bit better. And then now he's been this big guy on Instagram for a long time. And that was very prophetic, because now he has this huge Instagram following on which he can call for anything that it is that he would like them to do. So let's go into the next section. The next section goes back to how these ideas actually formulated and why they might make sense for you, especially from a sales standpoint. So this is from page 13 of the book. The year back then was 2008 when I first started selling 401ks. And so by that, I mean, I would get my company issued Chevy Impala, and I worked for a company called the Hartford and drive down to Chicago on a daily basis. And I put on for about 7 years, I put on about 40,000 miles per year. And this is the route that I traveled. So up here in Madison, where I lived, I'd travel first to Indianapolis, and then eventually I had a sales territory in Chicago. So before I graduated to Chicago, I had to do 3 months in Indianapolis. And my question for you in the chat, if you could please answer this, is if you had to make it to a 9 a.m. meeting Eastern time in Madison, you'd have to leave at 2:30 a.m. Central time. And that's what I used to do on Mondays, and then stay down there during the business week and then come back on Friday afternoons. So 2:30 to 8 a.m. in the car. What would you do for 5.5 hours on a Monday morning? How would you occupy that time? Okay, we got audiobooks. Steve says call prospects. Aaron says listen to, hold on, it's coming really quickly. Let's see. Listen to true crime podcasts. Thanks, Aaron. Kate says listen to podcasts, a lot of podcasts. So this is 2008. Okay, so remember when we used to get podcasts on our Blackberries? Pablo says the ROTOMA podcast. Thank you. So what we used to do is take our Blackberries or whatever device we had back then, and we'd have to hook them up to a computer and try to download podcasts, and then somehow get that Blackberry either to talk to your car, or you'd have to burn them on CDs. That's how archaic it was. And that was really podcast 1.0. And now I don't know what version we're on, like 2.0 or 3.0. But that was something that a lot of people used to do, or sometimes maybe you listen to talk radio or whatever. But because I had a big sales number, so they dropped me in Indianapolis with a $40 million a year sales number, and didn't give me any context, no pipeline, no nothing. I would look at this and go, wow, this is a long time I'm spending in the car, actually not working. Like, I'm just getting by. I'm just trying to bide my time. And so what I did back then, as opposed to just wasting time, which I did at first, is I built out my first social media platform. This was 2008. So instead of building something smart like Twitter or Facebook, I did this. So I built this. I built a spreadsheet of 164 targeted financial advisors, where it sat on 4 pages on the passenger side of my company issued Chevy Impala. And I would start to call people one by one. So what Steve maybe said in jest before, call prospects, that's actually what I used to do. I would call people at their office, knowing that they wouldn't be there. And I'd leave voicemails for them because it was imperative for me to get them to think about me. Okay, so what I didn't mention on the voicemail is things like, hey, it's Spencer X. Smith from the Hartford. I'm your 401k specialist here in Indianapolis, or later Chicago. I'm calling to follow up on the proposal, or check in on the proposal, or touch base on the proposal. Now, those are just euphemisms, right? Touching base, checking in, following up. Those are euphemisms for, are you ready to buy it or not? Now, I'm going to soften it, right, by saying like, hey, I'm checking in. What's up? Do you want to buy it? That's doesn't work, because people don't want to get back to you then. I mean, it's important. Like, we've heard the fortunes in the follow-up, but is there a better way to follow up? And I think the answer is yes. So what I used to do is leave voicemails like this. Hey, it's Spencer X. Smith from the Hartford. I'm your 401k specialist here in Indianapolis. Last week, we had the opportunity to work on a 401k plan for a law firm. It was about $3.5 million. The 4 people at the firm that were the most important people, they were failing their testing. This is a nerdy 401k term that I talk about. And this is how we fixed it. In the next 30 seconds, I'll tell you the story. Same voicemail over and over and over again for 5.5 hours. 161 voicemails was my record. Now, did that work? Did that work over time? Did people eventually call me back and go, stop bothering me? Now, what they did is they eventually called me back months after that initial voicemail, and they go, you know what? You keep leaving me these voicemails about what you do. And I find those actually really helpful. And in fact, I have a law firm situation right now is almost the exact same size as what you talked about. Can you maybe walk me through that process? And I said, sure. And what this is really important, you guys, and you've seen this, the Gartner research on this, right? Where all of these B2B buyers are doing all of their research ahead of time. That's what I used to do in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, is I would deliver people content marketing. I'd say, here's something one-on-one that I think is really impactful and that will help you make a better buying decision. And I'm just going to objectively deliver it to you. And so what started happening is because I worked for this huge company, right? So people would call me and I'd get at bats. So I'd hear about these opportunities and they call me late in the sales cycle. Like typically it was about a 17-month sales cycle. They'd call me at month 16 and go, hey, Spence, I need a proposal from you on this thing that I'm working on. And I go, cool. Can I stop by your office and maybe talk through the proposal? They go, no. We're already like way advanced past that. All we need is your price. And I'd win or die based on price. We've all been in that situation, right? So instead of that, what started happening after all these voicemails that I would leave over time is people started calling me earlier and earlier on in the sales cycle. And eventually they started calling me at month 0 when they'd uncover their opportunity and go, I need help now. And what that did is decommoditized what I was selling. So I'd go to their office at month 0. We'd go through the 17 months together and they go in with me and no one else when it came to their opportunity. Now, this worked really well. You get nice little acrylic sales work. I just actually threw this out the other day because I'm like, what am I going to do with this now? This one was a nice oversized check. Like when you go to a conference, like you're on a game show and you get an oversized check, you get to hold up. And that was pretty cool. But I realized that over that period of time, I wasn't leveraging my knowledge. Now I came up just out of high school. I'm just out of college. I went to IBM. So I was at IBM Global Services for the Y2K days. And this is a really formative time in IT. Like back then, there was no such thing as a CIO or a CTO. Like IT was either you were doing network administration or database administration. But this really put it on the map was Y2K. What IBM told me back then is, look, it's all about the data. I'm like, what data? Like we have 40 megabyte hard drives and we couldn't even put like 7 MP3s on that these days. But what they said is it's coming and Moore's law will dictate that we're going to have all of this data. And this is what's going to play out. So when I saw social media coming, back then I was in a highly, highly regulated industry. They wouldn't let me use social media. I go, wow, this is the greatest opportunity there's ever been for us to scale and leverage our knowledge to reach more people without having to do one-on-one all the time. Now, not supplanting one-on-ones, but as an adjunct to that. So that's what I think is for all of us, the greatest opportunity there's ever been is to leverage our knowledge through the use of social media. So we're going to go into module 2. This is going to be lesson 1 on module 2. Let's talk about the 3 kinds of media, okay? Because we talk about social media, and we know the singular version of that is medium, right? Just like criteria and criterion. So there's media, which is more than one, and then we have mediums, which are the styles of media. So there are really 3 kinds of media. There's analog, there's digital, and what we call infinite digital, which is replicable and shareable. Now, when you think about analog media, this is what analog media was. So this is the first tape that I ever had. So for you all you OGs like me, this is back what we used to listen to. And you know that little pencil trick, right? Where you use the pencil and try to fix your tape. I actually had this tape. This is 1983, and I wore out this tape. So that the tape was analog, right? It had a shelf life on it. And it was so impactful to me. Like I love that album so much that I had to go back and buy it again. Because what was my other option? Like there was no Spotify, there's no Napster, so I could steal it back then either. There's just no opportunity other than that physical tape. I'd actually go buy another one. So that's analog media, right? Or that's a newspaper. And that's something that we put on a wall or something. Now there's digital media, which is this, like those voicemails that I used to leave. Now, what's a caveat about this is, although it's digital, right, it doesn't degrade over time, doesn't wear out. It's something where it's really hard to share because there's no inherent way for people to share a voicemail. Like, how would you do that? right? Like how would you actually take an office voicemail and share it? You wouldn't, but it was digital, so it didn't wear out. But now we have this whole social media thing, right? And this is where everything starts to change. So just let me show you an example of how this plays out. So one of the questions I hear a lot, like many of you, I'm guessing, is give me some tactics, Spence. Like tell me what works right now. Like what's the best time to post? What's the best style to post? Blah, blah, blah. What I love about this replicable digital media and shareable media is that we can take what it is that we know, we can share it, and then we can further that conversation, right? We can advance the conversation based on something that we already have. So here's a really good example of this. I was out in, seems like forever ago now, I was out in Boston giving a talk at Gillette Stadium. That's where the Patriots play. And I did this little video, right? And then I did this photo, and this was at a different speech. It was in Madison. And I answered the question here, well, what's better, videos or non-videos? What's better, pictures or videos? And so, well, let's just take a look at the data, okay? So I highlighted the data here, and I see that it's got 78 likes, 10 comments, 1,585 views. That's the video post here. The non-video post got 96 likes, 11 comments, and 7,459 views. So which is better? I don't know. I don't know which is better, but it depends on what your objective is, right? So that's here in the middle, and I won't belabor this because it's just basically the narrative that I told you. But I took one share from social media here, took one share from social media here, and then combined that into yet another share on social media. So what this allows me to do is recall the stuff that I've created in the past. And that's what I propose to you. Like I know we have some really prolific people on the call today as far as you're on social media all the time. Go back and revisit your old stuff and look at what you said 3 or 5 years ago and go, oh, let me bring this back, because you might have forgotten some nuggets that you in fact yourself have done. Okay, so what this allows us to do from a replicable and shareable standpoint is it allows us to then carry on with this content and have a back catalog of sorts. It's kind of like when you hear a new song from a person for the first time, you go, who is that band? And you go back and you look for her other songs, right? That same thing happens here. Like there's a huge opportunity for people to revisit all of your old stuff and let that live on over time. So again, we have a massive ability to scale over time. What I love about it is, as well as we have data, right? So you guys know if you click on, I'm just going to go back here. When you click on any of these views numbers here on any of your posts, you're going to be able to ascertain very quickly who's seeing your stuff. And as you walk from right to left on LinkedIn, specifically, this is the geographic area, the job title, and then obviously the people who work at a certain company. Now, I feel like this is super impactful, just as an aside, is this gives a lot of confidence, right? Like if you know that people from a certain person, from a certain company whom you're prospecting, you like to work with, et cetera, if they're seeing your post, then the propensity for you to want to follow up is much higher. Okay. So just keep that in mind if you could. Now, here's the question that always pops up. All right. You want me to create infinite digital content? Like I've seen, as Kristen had alluded to, I've seen people who have their video on at the wrong time and have that thing play out, and then it's there forever, right? Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So is there a caveat to doing this? Is there a reason not to do digital media? And the answer is obviously yes, but let me just contradict that for just a second. Okay, so this will be lesson 2 in module 2. It's called the 1% rule of the internet. And if you haven't heard this before, this is really, really important. So the way this breaks out specifically, and thanks for your kind words on that, Chelsea, as well. So this is how this breaks out specifically. Of everybody on the internet, 90% of people online are considered spectators. And the kids call these creepers or lurkers, right? They're just on the periphery. They're just watching what other people are doing. 9% actually engage in some capacity. They like, or they comment, or they share, right? So they show other people that they're listening. They further that conversation. 1% then, what do they do? Well, they actually create the content by which all of the other people are affected. Now, you might look at this and go, I don't know if that's true. Now, there are references that I can give you specifically from the Mayo Clinic, where this originated back in the day when they had bulletin board services for physicians. But what I'm going to propose to you is something a little more squishy, a little bit more anecdotal, okay? So when I was growing up as a kid in Milwaukee, if you were to ask me or anybody in my age range at all, I lived there till I was 11, ask anybody in my age range at all, who's famous? There is only a finite amount of famous people. Like there's basically the Hollywood people, the sports stars, and politicians, and not really many other people, like maybe some authors. Like that was pretty much it, because there were huge, huge institutions that had gatekeepers, and they decided who was famous and who wasn't. So if you were on the ball field, you were famous. If you weren't on the ball field, you weren't famous. Now you contrast that with today, which again seems like forever ago, when I'll go into a high school and I'll talk about the merits for high school seniors as to why they should be on LinkedIn. And I'll ask them, hey, just out of curiosity, before we get into this, who's your favorite YouTuber? And they go, oh, YouTuber, you mean somebody who gets paid to do YouTube videos? I go, yeah. I ask 17 high school seniors, who's your favorite YouTuber? How many answers do I get? 17 different answers. And who do I know? Nobody. Nobody. So we think about this opportunity where we've had a democratization of what's famous, right? So a lot of the stuff that people are streaming right now, like if you ask me about any Netflix show, I have no idea. Like, oh, don't you watch Stranger Things? Nope, I don't. But it's super, super, super famous to this small niche of people. And The Last Dance is super famous to this group of people. And the Middleton Chamber of Commerce is super famous to this group of people, right? It just makes sense because we've had such a diffusion of our attention and our ability to pay attention to stuff. So what I propose to you is we don't need, as I said before, to be the most well-known or most talented or most famous person. All we need to do is be known within this small realm of space. And the way that you do that is by creating content. Okay. So I'm going to give you real quick the number one lesson from my rock band. This is from page 23 of the book. Number one lesson from my rock band. It's really, really, really hard to create your own scene. You need to go where a scene already exists and make yourself valuable. And what do I mean by that? Well, it used to be really hard for us to go into a bar and go, hey, can we put out a rock and roll show here? They'd be like, yeah, sure. All you got to do is get the sound person, get the light person, uh, probably sell tickets to the show and get people to show up and spend money at the bar. Be like, that sounds really hard. Like that's a lot of work. It's a lot easier to go where a place already needs bands and go, hey, I see that you need bands. Could we be one of those bands? And start to ask those questions. And so I think you know where I'm going with this. This is where we did this with Summerfest specifically, and I won't belabor this whole concept, but basically I cold called the Summerfest office in 2001, and I go, hey, I realize you need 700 bands over 11 days at 11 stages. How do we get to be one of those bands? And the woman walked me through. Her name is Stacy Olson. She's still in the business. She walked from bottom to top. She goes, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Some are going to get harder as we go through. Have you done all of these things? And I said, yes. And so we sent in our materials to her, and she made sure that we got to play Summerfest because she liked us and she knew that I was asking some super, super naive questions and she was rooting for us. Okay, so that's what we discovered way back then in 2002 when we played Summerfest for the first time, is go where a scene already exists and just ask the question. So what's the analog here? Well, I stopped updating this slide because it's just getting like, it's like we're talking about government spending money. It's like 40 billion, 500 billion. Like what's the difference, right? Like a lot of people aren't social media. So if you're not using this opportunity to create content for those who are using this thing that everybody's on all the time, then consider doing that. Okay, consider doing that. Now, this is the second to last module, the one social media strategy that works everywhere, because we always get the question, well, what do we create? Like, how do we actually show up? What do we do? And the answer is just brag about yourself, right? Just take some sweet selfies, be like, what's up? Hey, I'm awesome. I'm here on my boat, or like whatever it is that you do, that's great, right? And here's some really famous people doing exactly that. Now, what do you notice with these four gentlemen right here? What I notice about these four gentlemen is specifically, this is The Edge from U2. That's Bret Michaels from Poison. That's a guy not named Brian Wilson. Who's that guy from the Beach Boys? Bonus points if anybody can tell me who that is in the chat. Not Brian Wilson, but the other guy from the Beach Boys. And then Rivers Cuomo from Weezer. Mike Love. Thank you, Steve. Well done. Now, what do you notice about all of these people? They're all wearing their own band's stuff. Yes. So The Edge is on stage playing his instrument, and he's wearing a U2 t-shirt. Bret Michaels, I don't know what he's doing. And clearly Mike Love and Rivers Cuomo from Weezer are performing as well. And I'll give Rivers at least a little bit of leeway here because he's probably doing it to be ironic. But I think a lot of people are wearing their own band's t-shirts. What we discovered back in our band days is if we show up in Indianapolis or Minneapolis or Grand Rapids or whatever, we go, hey, other bands that we're playing with, is it okay if I wear your t-shirt when we play? They'd go, yeah, that'd be awesome. Really? You'd wear our t-shirt? Yeah. Why wouldn't we wear it? Everybody knows who we are. We're on stage already. Just let us wear your t-shirt. What do people do when that happens? What do people do when you go out of your way to make them feel recognized and feel important? They reciprocate, right? They want to give back to you. So if we do the exact opposite of what these gentlemen are doing, and think about it this way, we really have three options for using social media. Okay, we can say nothing, which is what the vast majority of people do. We can say something about ourselves, which is what a lot of people do. Or we can say something about someone else. Now, this option, option three, this falls into two camps. Okay. Either you turn to Twitter and talk about your cold burrito and how upset you are, which is one option. You can say something about somebody else. Or you can say, you know who's doing great work right now? The Isthmus in Chelsea. Despite the fact that they've had some furloughs, they're still producing what it is that they produce to help us all be more informed. So as we come out of this, we're going to feel better about things. Okay. So you can use this infinite social media that we have, all of us have the ability to brag about other people. Now, this is not just a feel good thing. It's my pleasure, Chelsea. Thanks for all the work that you do. It's not just a feel good thing, though. The data actually backs up why this is better. So let me just show you from my own experience, right? Because that's my tenet is I have no right to tell you what to do or to ask you to do things that I haven't done myself first. So this is a very typical LinkedIn post, right? Hey, I wrote this article from the American Bar Association. It's about this nerdy SEO thing. I'm going to share it and hope that people read it, right? So I got 234 views of the post. And I clicked on the views as I had shown you before to assert, who saw it, like who actually was interested in it. So here are the numbers. I saw that there were 21 salespeople, 10 CEOs, 9 corporate strategists, whatever that is, and then 7 business owners. Now you contrast this 234 views on a post that was about me, and you flip it. So this was quite a while back. This is a few years ago, 2017. I took the Brava women to watch, 15 women to watch, 13 of whom I knew individually. So I tagged all of them, right? I took this picture from Brava. I tagged the people that were highlighted in the picture in the article, and I shared that. And I said, hey, congratulations. So instead of 234 views, this got 5,000 views, 308 salespeople, 137 CEOs, executive directors, et cetera. So I feel like, guys, this is a really important point, right? It's super, super, super important to remind people what it is that you do for a living, because we don't get paid based on friendship, right? Like we have to sell something eventually. But to offset that, right, instead of just pitching constantly, if we look out the window and we say, what good is going on right now? What can I share about other people that I can help raise awareness for them? You can then engender trust over time. And this is something for which you will never, ever, ever run out of content, because there's always good news to share about other people. Okay. So 2 more things before we get into questions. There's this old adage from sales: things work so well that you stop doing them, because like anything else, everything new is a novelty, and then it just becomes work. So you're going to do something like this. You're going to do a feel good post. You're going to get on social, maybe post a little bit more. You go, this is great. And then you're going to fall off, right? So please just remind yourself of this, that things work so well that you stop doing them. And the other thing, and this is probably my favorite quote ever, is 80% out the door is better than 100% in the drawer. Said another way, perfection is the enemy of production. So please, when you have hesitancies about when is the right time to push publish or share or tweet or whatever it might be, know that there's so many reasons. You just need to push publish on that one thing and then move on to the next. And then I lied. Sorry, there's one more thing too, and this is super contemporary. So I'm going to get super tactical for just a second. Okay. Now we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, I totally forgot about this. So I'm going to get super tactical with this. So if you think about anybody that you connect to on LinkedIn, right? There's something called account mapping, account selling, organizational selling. We call it social selling at the class in New Jersey that I teach about this stuff. So social selling or organizational selling is the idea that you take a map of who works at a company and figure out who reports to whom and how. Like she's a CEO, okay? She's got 4 lieutenants, like CFO, COO, CMO, whatever it might be. And if you can get in with these people, that's really good. But she's the best, right? She's absolutely the best. So what we used to do before this COVID-19 thing is we try to go into an organization and connect somewhere with hopes that we then get up to the people that can say yes, right? Because within any organization, there's so many people who can say no, but only a few that can say yes. So before this, it was really, really, really hard to connect with the top people at any given company because they were very busy and they were very selective. So let's flip this on its head. What we used to do to graduate up through an organization, meaning let's connect with whomever we can with hopes that we get to the decision makers. I want you to go top down. Okay, so here's been something that's been very prominent, especially locally. So Paul Hoffman from Monona Bank, it could be any one of the bank presidents here in town, any one of them. They're all doing this exact same thing right now. What he's doing is he understands as the president of the bank, he is not just the leader of the bank, he is also the mouthpiece for the bank. And the one media that he can control is social media. He can turn to social media and say, here's exactly what I want to say right now in the words that I want to say. And a reporter isn't going to take and make them something that I don't want him or her to. So he's saying exactly what he wants, and he's bragging about what it is that they're doing at the bank. So before this post, and I'll give you some context for this post in just a second. Before this post, he was bragging about, hey, we're up all night, we're up all weekend processing these PPP loans. Okay, so this has basically been a daily digest for Paul. So this post specifically talks in terms of, hey, we know that the PPP ran out of money. So this is just before it got the replenishment that happened. We know that this is frustrating for a lot of people. I just want to be helpful. I want to make sure that people know about what it is that we're doing to help them. So again, trying to be helpful with this post, right? Now, where I want you to think about is if you want to connect systematically through any organization, so you want to go from being a ghost to becoming known within an organization, I want you to find that leader, find what she's posting, and comment on what it is that he or she is doing. So let's just look at the data and why this is really important, okay? So what Paul did here is he said this stuff about his bank, right? And it has 38 likes versus one comment. Now, a lot of the likes are those that work with him at the bank, his pals, whatever. It's one of those things where people are scrolling through and they see a post from Paul and they're like, because I don't want him to know that I didn't like his post, right? But this fella at the bottom, this is this guy being clever, okay? Joe, and the reason I know Joe is because he and I have spoken at the same banking conferences in like North Dakota and Iowa and all these random places. Joe, what he understands is he wants to, again, de-anonymize and stay top of mind with Paul. Because what Joe does is he sells training to banks. He's a former banker and he sells training to banks, how to sell more stuff. So what he wants Paul to think about is him. Okay. So what Joe did is he didn't just become like number 39. He commented on the post and he didn't say something like, great post or thanks, Paul, or any of those throwaway comments that mean nothing. He showed Paul in his comments that he read his post, he affirmed what he said, and then he took it a step further, right? He basically said, look, what you said is completely true. And if people aren't getting love from their bank right now, they should probably consider looking elsewhere. So what Paul's doing on a daily basis is he's going on LinkedIn. And Paul's posting on LinkedIn, right, about his stuff. That's his digest. But then he's also looking at his past posts. And he's not looking at the 38 likes and being like, oh, who liked my post? I better check a little box and be like, oh, she did and he didn't, right? This is really him looking at the comments and going, what Joe is allowing me to do then is allow more people to see what it is that I said. So Paul is going to look at Joe very favorably because what Joe is doing by commenting on his post is ensuring that more people see Paul's post and he's making him feel good about what he posted as well. So let's pretend Joe didn't know Paul and Joe's making meaningful comments on Paul's posts. Joe could then go in with a LinkedIn connection request after making comments on Paul's post and say, hey, Paul, you know what? I really love what you've been posting here on LinkedIn. And I'd love to connect with you here so I can better follow your career as we progress. Would that be okay? And you guys, 9 times out of 10, all of these people who are the most important people, quote unquote, like the most ink on their business cards, right? Those people, those companies, when you help them feel good through meaningful comments, that CEO, she'll accept your connection request because there's context, right? You've made them feel good too. You provided them genuine feedback about what it is that they're doing that's valuable, and you're giving them more exposure for their posts. And then what do you do once you're connected to the CEO of American Family or Exact Sciences or all those people that I've connected to very deliberately? You can then cascade through that entire organization. So you connect with her, she's the boss, right? You go to her VP of finance and you go, hey, I'm connected to Catherine. I'd love to follow your career here on LinkedIn as well. As we progress, I'm a big fan of your company. Would that be okay? That CFO, that VP of finance, looks and sees that you're connected to his or her boss, and they're going to accept your connection request. Okay, so what I want you to do is be very deliberate and find out who would I like to target as far as an organization go, map out their accounts and go, if I can find those things that the CEO is sharing, if I can comment on her posts, have her accept my connection request, then you can send connection requests to the rest of the people afterward as well, knowing that they'll accept those. So before we get into questions, I wanted to show you that this is really cool. This is from Charlie Gahn. She had sent me this picture of all of these little bookmarks that she put in her post, which I thought was really cool. And thank you, Jenny. And then we can answer any questions that you have in the last 8 minutes.
So if you guys would like to go ahead, you can ask those questions through chat, or if you feel like it, you can also take yourself off mute to ask them audio.
Oops, sorry.
No questions, huh?
All right, thanks, Nicole. Steve says, love the examples, thank you. Kate says, rockstar, thanks, Kate, I appreciate that. Jenny says, is this strategy best for LinkedIn versus the other social media platforms? Jenny, I think so. Yeah, I think this strategy specifically that I was talking about here, where you systematically go through and connect with people, I think that's 100% applicable to LinkedIn. A, because that's where these people are paying a lot of attention right now and they're spending a lot of their time. And then B, they also are understanding that through the lens of business, that's what's forming up this conversation. Like if I go and try to, like if I exchange, comments on LinkedIn with Paul and I try to go be his Facebook buddy, that might be a little bit odd. He's like, no, Facebook, that's just for me, right? So maybe just think about this as LinkedIn. Thanks, Kate. Steve says, how much time do you need to spend a day scanning, commenting, and sharing on LinkedIn? And thank you, Mike. So let me just get into this for a second. Going to go to my browser. Thank you for bringing that up, Steve. So this is what I think is really operative about what Steve says is the scanning idea. So where I feel like a lot of people fall into a trap is, coincidentally, Chelsea's showing up. Either the social media platforms are listening to me or not. I'm guessing they are listening to me though. So what I feel like a lot of people fall into this trap is they start doing this. And it's like, well, LinkedIn, just show me whatever you think is best, right? And we call this the feed, right? But I just think about this as being the trough, right? That's why it's called the feed. It's like LinkedIn is just saying, here's whatever we think is going to keep you engaged. So Steve, what I propose to you is we are very deliberate with when we go onto the platform and we say, what is it that I'm going to do to take control of the platform and make sure that I just don't mindlessly scroll through my feed, which, I mean, given it's fun sometimes, right? But at the same time, like I want to go on the platform and say, what am I going to do to be impactful? So unless you have Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which is great this way, but it's pretty expensive, I would just go through the network and say, like, who am I connected to specifically? And then make sure that I'm listening to those people, that I'm paying attention to those people. So that's where I would specifically seek them out. And then I would put in their search terms here as far as their name, I mean. You guys, by the way, like this guy has now become very famous. Like he wasn't as famous when I got to know him, but the way that I got to know Eric, who's the legitimate billionaire that I know, who's now like $12 billion, whatever it is, who founded Zoom. The way he and I got to know each other initially was from Twitter, where I was giving them shout outs because they were big in the telemedicine space, which is something I'm super passionate about. And he and I got to exchanging messages on Twitter, and then eventually when I got to meet him in San Jose, that's where he and I got to know each other. So it just is a really, really good way to get connected or have contacts with anybody that you might want to. Okay, Jesse says, what program do you use to track your social media? I don't use any program. I just kind of wing it. I'm sure that's a terrible answer, so I apologize. Terry said, who shared a post of yours that really overwhelmed you? Donald Driver was a really nice share of a post. He and I ran into each other at LaGuardia Airport, and he was like a super nice dude. We were actually literally touching shoulders because we were on the same bus on the tarmac. Like if you guys been out to LaGuardia, it's just a mess right now. But he it was so funny. So he's touching my shoulder, right? I'm like, since we're literally touching, Mr. Driver, is it okay if I get a selfie with you? He's like, oh yeah, totally. And then the entire bus was like, oh my gosh, it's Donald Driver. We should get a picture with him. And so he was just so gracious the entire time that I wrote a little story about, like, when you're Donald Driver, you have to be on 24/7, whether you want to or not. And then he ended up sharing that. He made it his pinned tweet, which I thought was really cool. Chelsea says, hi. Chad says, what's the best way to follow up with someone that is a second or third connection that you don't know and they like a post that you make? Best way to follow up with someone that is a second or third connection that you don't know and like a post that you make. I think, Chad, what I'd specifically do is if somebody likes a post that you make, I would use that opportunity right then to seek out that person. So I type in their name. And if they're a second connection, obviously you can make a connection request, right? Just by pushing a button, but I would make sure you add a note and say, hey, really appreciate you liking my post and I'd love to follow your career. Here's where we progress as well. Let me just type that in as well. This took a long time to kind of come up with. So may I connect with you and follow your career as we progress? I really like this verbiage. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Are you on a second screen, Spencer?
Probably. You guys can't see my LinkedIn right now?
We can see your LinkedIn, but there's nothing coming up on the
Oh,
screen.
I just
You're in the
put
search bar.
I just put it in the chat. I'm so sorry.
Oh, got
Yeah.
it. Sorry.
Yeah. And so Chad, then with the third connections, right? And this is probably not something that's well known. I don't know who I'm not at least a second connection to, but if you go into their specific profile, you can from there then you can hit a connection request as well. So like the best way to explain this is normally you can't send third connections a connection request, but if you go onto their profile specifically, you can then send a connection request from there. So you can kind of circumvent that whole second level thing. And then Chelsea says, I know of Zoom because of you. Thank you. Jesse says, haha. Cool. All right, guys, a couple minutes left. Any other thoughts or questions about this?
Well, as we close here, I just want to give a shout out. Thank you, Spencer, for being here and doing this with the chamber and our membership. We really appreciate it. And then Omar, thank you also to H. Kruger and to Total Wine for sponsoring the program. We do next week have an event. It's our economic development session. It's on Wednesday, same time at noon. We have the privilege of having Dane County Executive Joe Parisi joining us I wish I could tell you what he's going to talk about, but things are changing pretty quickly. So there's a chance whatever I tell you is not what we're going to actually address. But if that's of interest to you, I do encourage you to visit the website to register for that. And then, a wise person once told me, if you don't, in the next 72 hours, if you don't take something you learned today and implement it, it'll go away and you'll lose it and you won't actually do it. So I do encourage you guys to take at least one strategy from today and to implement that and make your business even better.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for having me.